in April, I raised the target to 8,700. And then in October, after we had the big rebound, I looked again and I said, that's not enough. So I raised targets again to 9,500. So my S&P target right now is 9,500.
That is a huge move. And you think that could happen in this calendar year?
In fact, I think it could happen in the first half of this calendar year. Doesn't have to. It may stretch out. Everything I do seems to, I anticipate that it takes a little longer, but I would not be surprised if this goes parabolic that we get there by this summer. So I raised silver, well, I'll start with gold. Gold, I think I raised from 4,000 to 5,000 last, I don't remember whether that was last October or whether
you've been bang on when it comes to gold. Yeah.
So I raised it again just recently. Well, yeah, that's right. I raised it to 5,000 from 4,000 last October. Then I raised again in my first quarter letter in January to 5,500. And I just raised on this last sell-off. Again, I tend to do it not with momentum, but the opposite. In this last sell-off, I raised it again at 6,800. So I'm now at 6,800 on gold. Silver, I'm now at 180. And went through a few. I was at 75 for the longest time for several years.
Yeah.
Raised it to 100. Probably in October, raised it to 125, I think, in January. And then, a month later, I'm raising it to 180. So I am clearly bullish on the metals. The week before the sell-off, or when we had that spike to 122 on silver, I said we could see a very quick 30% sell-off. This isn't the peak. It will rebound from that. Well, we got more than 30%. And I do think this thing is also, those targets could be seen by this summer.
According to David Hunter, gold is heading to $6,800 and silver to $180 in the first half of 2026. After a deflationary bust drops metals 30 to 70%, he sees gold reaching $20,000 and silver potentially $1,000 plus in the early 2030s commodity supercycle, driven by massive money printing and reindustrialization. Thanks for watching. Give a thumbs up and subscribe to Find Metals for the latest insights.
I get a lot of questions about what's your target in the bust for silver and gold, and I go, well, we got to see where they go first. I have a target out there of 180 for silver and 6,800 for gold, but I'm not so sure that they aren't going to be raised again. So I have to, we have to really get there to be able to put something on the other side. But what I'd say in general is, I think you probably are looking at maybe 30 or 40% hit to gold from wherever it goes here in the pre-bust, and maybe 60, 70 and more percent or more in silver, because silver is very economically sensitive and certainly a much less liquid thing once it turns the other way. There's a lot of speculation in these numbers right now. I realize long term there's a shortage of silver, and so that's the long term bull story is part of that, but in a bust, when demand's fallen through the floor because of a bad economy around the world, silver's going to be more volatile than gold. So it could fall well more than 50%. But let's say it gets to 200, that means it comes back to maybe 70, maybe it goes back to 50. I don't know. But I can't put a number on because I don't even know where the end game is on the upside yet.
That's fair.
So I think that time is coming.
Yeah.
And the other thing with, unlike the stock market, which I think is putting in a generational top, meaning that the highs of this market, once we get there, I think will stand for decades, not one decade, maybe two, maybe more. Whereas the metals, post-bust, I have much, much higher targets. So the only reason I'm probably more conservative than some of those people now is my concern that we're heading for a global bust. If I were straight lining this thing, I'm looking for 20,000 gold in early next decade. I'm looking for I had been saying 500 silver and thinking that's a reach. I'm now thinking, if we get to anywhere near 200 this cycle, and there are people even saying it'll go higher than that this cycle, 500 seems way conservative. So, but anyway, my
Yeah.
early 2030s call is much higher than these numbers, but I see a bust in between. So I define a bust as something that's deeper and bigger than a recession, not as drawn out as a depression, like the Great Depression. And it's accompanied by what really makes it a bust is it's accompanied by a financial crisis of major proportion. So 2008-9 was very close to a bust. As I say, I think they brought it back from the cliff just in time. Back when GE was, the course paper market was freezing up in late 2008, and they were talking about, GE might fail because they have to access paper, so have to access those markets so often. The government acted fast enough, the Fed acted fast enough, and they pulled us back from the cliff. Because of 2008-9, there's going to be reluctance this time around to act. They're going to say, "Oh, we don't want to go back there again." You've heard all the criticism about QE and QE to infinity, etc. And Powell's been on record many times as saying we're not going to repeat that mistake. I think pretty much Wall Street says that was a mistake. So when the time is similar, they're going to be reluctant, or they're going to be doing it in baby steps and taking longer to get there. So as a result, I think we can go over the cliff this time, and all that means is I think we could see more bank failures and more financial dislocation than we saw then, as bad as that was. They will inevitably have to react. It's just a question of timing. If they react soon enough, they can avoid a bust. If they don't act soon enough, they go over the cliff and then have to pull it back. Every cycle, and having done this through many cycles, I can say this unequivocally, is that every cycle has new leadership. So, this cycle's been mostly technology and maybe healthcare earlier on, and growth stocks for sure. The next cycle is going to be very much because of the whole story about inflation, but also the story about reindustrialization, reshoring, all the building out of the grid and what the AI is requiring in terms of power. The next story is going to be a huge rebuild of the infrastructure or expansion of the infrastructure. A lot of industrial expansion, and when you're building new plant equipment, well, what do you need? You need commodities. So it's going to be a huge commodity super cycle, and so those are the areas of leadership will be. And we're seeing some of that obviously late the cycle, so it's easier to understand today than maybe 3 or 4 years ago when everything was consumer and tech. Mm-hmm. But it's going to be industrial stocks and commodity stocks that I think will be the leadership. And when I say commodity, and I've been a bear on oil and energy for the last few years, but when I say commodities, energy will be right at the top of that list, because I think oil could get down to 30 in the bust and go to 500 in the next cycle. It's a funny thing. Like I said, some of it I think is developed and some of it is just God-given. I just don't need to be with the crowd. The crowd doesn't influence my thinking. And obviously from a market standpoint, it's been proven over and over that when everybody's in agreement, you don't want to be there. So it's funny because I'm getting challenged on X now, because obviously my silver and gold call is not, momentum is what drives most people. So silver and gold call is not contrary at all. Mm-hmm. And I'm starting to get plenty of company on the bullish side of the stock market. And so people go, "You're not a contrarian." I go, "Well, you misunderstand what a contrarian is." For me, anyway, I'm most contrary at inflection points. So when everybody's all in, I'll be bearish. When everybody's all out, like they were in October of 2022, I'll be very bullish. So it's in between. There's actually a period in there where the consensus is very right, and right now that's the case. I mean, when you go vertical, well, silver's a good example.
Yeah.
Why do you go verticals? Take your pick. What number is it? You know, is it 110? Is it 122? Is it 180?
Yeah.
Is it 250? You know, there's a guy out
Right.
there, Oliver, who was saying we could see $300 or $400 silver this summer. I mean, he's a good guy, and I'm not questioning him. I can't get there right now, but he
Yeah.
could be right. I think the bust itself, which is the economic
Mhm.
part of the forecast, like I said, it's a very bad down economy accompanied by a financial crisis. That's the bust. I'd say 12 to 18 months. That doesn't mean you don't have lingering effects, because I think there's a lot that are coming out the other side that will still be, the consumer is going to get hammered. So
Yeah.
I think the next cycle looks very different. But 12 to 18 months, I think the stock market, the bear market might last 9 months or 12 months, depending on how long the bust is. But, you'll have in a bear market, it's not going to be straight from the top to the bottom. You'll have bear market rallies. Part of that probably driven by the Fed stepping in and saying, we're going to print several $trillion here. And everybody gets excited thinking that marks the bottom. So you might be down 50% at that time and then rally back halfway. And then they realize that's not nearly enough, and it goes back down, or more problems show up and it goes back down. And you're down, 75, 80%. And then, so you'll have at least two legs down, maybe even three. So that plays out over time, because, those bear market rallies might last 2 months each. So if you had two of them, it stretches it out 4 or 5 months, and then, the downs are 2 or 3 months. So, like I said, I would guess, and I'm just guessing, but if rates are up, if inflation's up in the high single digits, any rational person at that point that knows economics, which means hopefully people on the Federal Reserve Board, and economic advisors to the president, whoever the president is in 28, let's say, if interest rates, if inflation is up in the high some single digits even, they should recognize that printing more money into an inflationary environment. I mean, they obviously recognize it now. They're going to recognize it even more then. They're going to have to resist the temptation to say, we got to print our way out of this, because that's only going to accelerate the inflation. And then you're really out of control. So I think it's probably latter part of 28. If I were guessing, I could be off by 2 years.
Yeah.
But we're going to be at that point where you really say we can't print. And the difficulty is we won't have the ability to pay to service all that debt. Because don't forget, we're whatever the debt is today. If I'm talking about 20 trillion in QE, that QE is going to be accompanied by a lot of new fiscal spending, the new debt. So that if we're talking about 38 or 9 trillion now in just U.S. debt, U.S. government debt, that could be 50 or 55 or 60 by then, and post bust, because of what we did during the bust.
Yeah.
I keep talking about the 330 trillion global debt that's out there. It's a number that at least is considered pretty accurate. That could be 500 trillion by the time we get to the end of the decade, and most of it because of the bust, in reaction to the bust.